7 years the dragon sealed her gates. The girl who knocked anyway, HFY. The gates were carved from a single slab of black granite, and they had not opened in 7 years. Saren could see the overgrowth where the hinges had rusted into the stone, not fully, but enough that forcing them would be the wrong idea even if she were the sort of person who forced things. She was not. She set her basket down, pressed her palm flat against the cold surface, and knocked. Nothing happened. She knocked again, 3 deliberate raps, the way her teacher Audrin knocked on a patient's door when the patient had been avoiding him for a week. She stepped back and looked at the carved lintel above the gate. Something had once been written there in old script. The letters were worn almost to shadows, and she spent a moment trying to make sense of the curves before she gave up. It did not matter what they said. What mattered was that someone had put them there, and that the stone they were carved into was still standing. "I know you're in there," she said. It wasn't an accusation, it was just a fact. The wind moved through the ruins' collapsed western wall. Somewhere inside, a crow called once and went quiet. Saren sat down on the granite step, pulled her cloak tighter, and opened her journal. She was 17, apprentice to Audrin the healer for 3 years, and she had exactly 1 patient who needed the heart moss that grew only in the sanctuary's inner garden, a moss that had survived 7 years of abandonment because something warm enough to breathe still lived inside those walls. 3 other healers in Veth's Crossing had told her to find a substitute. She had tried. There wasn't one. The fever the blacksmith's son was running didn't respond to substitutes. It responded to heart moss, and the heart moss grew here, and so here she was. She wrote in her journal for an hour. She did not write about the dragon. She wrote about the fever's progression, about the 3 failed compounds, about what she would try next if this didn't work. She kept her voice low, and even when she spoke aloud, which she did occasionally, just narrating her notes the way she did when she worked, because silence felt wasteful when there was thinking to be done. She was in the middle of describing the 3rd compound's failure, when a sound came from behind the gate. Not the sound of the gate opening. A different sound, deliberate, close, the weight of something very large shifting on stone just behind the slab. Listening. Saren did not look up from her journal. "I'm not asking to come in," she said. "I'm asking for about 2 handfuls of heart moss from the inner garden. It grows along the east-facing wall near the old cistern. I know it's there because I can smell it from here when the wind shifts." She paused. "The moss doesn't need you to do anything except let me have some. I'll cut it clean at the root bed so it grows back properly. I know how to harvest." The weight on the other side did not move. "My patient is 9 years old," Saren added. "His name is Tal. He's the blacksmith's son. I don't know if that matters to you. I'm not sure it should. I'm just telling you so you know I'm not lying about why I'm here." She turned a page in her journal. The wind picked up, and with it came the smell of the sanctuary more strongly, old stone and dry ivy, and underneath both, something warmer. Not fire. Closer to a coal's deep heat, the kind that lives in the center long after the flame has gone. Saren wrote for another half hour. The weight behind the gate did not leave. She came back the next morning. And the morning after that. She did not try the gate. She did not raise her voice. She sat on the same step in roughly the same position, and she wrote, and she talked about ordinary things, the quality of the morning light, the state of Tal's fever, the particular frustration of a compound that worked in theory but failed consistently in practice. She talked because silence between 2 living creatures felt like a kind of pressure, and she had no interest in applying pressure. She was not there to push anything open. She was there to be present, and to be honest, and to wait. On the 4th morning, she brought a second item in her basket alongside the tools and the journal, a wrapped bundle of dried river herbs, the kind Audrin used for smoke calming. She set it on the stone step beside her, in the open, where it would be visible from the gate's edge if anything looked through the gap at the hinge line. She did not mention it, she just wrote. The gap at the hinge line was there. She had measured it with her eye on the second day, a finger's width on the right side, where the rust had eaten an irregular channel. Not enough for her to see through clearly, enough for something with better eyes than hers to see out. On the sixth morning, the bundle of dried herbs was gone from the step. She had not heard it taken. Saren sat for a moment with her journal open and did not write anything. Then she turned to a fresh page and wrote, "The smoke herbs are gone. She must have reached through the hinge gap. Good. She is cold in there. The outer walls have lost the southern exposure to the ivy. I will bring something she can burn properly." She came the next morning with a small bundle of long-burning cedar wood wrapped in paper. She set it on the step. She did not say anything about it. "I looked up the records," she said instead, her voice carrying the same flat informational tone she always used. "I found the account from 7 years ago, the one in the Canton ledger." She turned a page in her journal, though she didn't need to, she had the account memorized. The entry says the sanctuary was sealed following the Battle of Veth's Pass and that the Dragon Guardian abandoned her post. She paused. "That's not what happened, though. I went further back. The supply records, the correspondence, the garrison commander's private letters, they're in the Canton archive if you know where to look. The elders went to you for information about the pass approaches. You gave it to them in good faith. They used it for an ambush that went wrong. 23 people died. They needed someone to account for it. The wind moved along the gate's edge. They chose you," Saren said. "They wrote you out of the ledger and put the blame where it would stick and cause the least inconvenience to themselves." She closed her journal. "I'm not saying this to get the heart moss," she said. "Tal is improving. Audrin found a partial substitute that's holding the fever down. He'll likely recover without the moss. I'm saying it because it's true, and someone should have said it 7 years ago and didn't. And that seems like a correctable error." The cedarwood was gone from the step when she came back the following morning. She nearly did not come back. Not because the task was done, Tal was still weak. The partial substitute was working but imperfectly, and she had meant what she said about knowing how to harvest. She nearly didn't come back because she wasn't sure what else she had to offer. She had said the thing that needed saying. She had left what she could leave. She wasn't the kind of person who pushed past a closed door just to prove she could. But Audrin, when she told him all of this, looked at her for a long moment over his reading spectacles and said, "Saren, go back." So she did. She sat on the step with her journal. She wrote about the morning, the light on the valley, the way the road below the sanctuary had started to show spring growth between the paving stones, the sound the wind made through the ruin's collapsed wall, which was different from the sound it made through a standing one. She wrote about the crow that had come back, which was apparently a permanent resident, and had begun regarding her with the particular expression of a creature that had decided someone was acceptable but not interesting. She wrote about Tal, who had sat up and asked for bread that morning, which was a good sign. She wrote all of this carefully, because she did not know who else might be listening, and because careful observation was the first thing Audrin had ever taught her. She was writing when the gate opened. Not dramatically, not with a groan or a rush of dark air or anything that would have suited the stories people told about Veth's sanctuary. The black granite slab moved slowly and steadily, and it made the sound of rust finally giving way to a decision, and then it was open. The dragon was larger than Saren had let herself imagine, though she had imagined carefully. She was deep slate gray, almost charcoal at the ridges of her spine and the leading edges of her wings, which were folded tight against her sides. Her scales had the patterned look of something very old, each one slightly irregular, overlapping the next at angles that caught the morning light differently, so that she seemed to shift color as she moved even though she was barely moving. She was as tall at the shoulder as the granite lintel, and her head, when she lowered it to regard Saren directly, came level with the third step. Her eyes were pale amber, the color of old honey held up to sunlight, and they were neither warm nor cold. They were simply precise. Saren did not stand up. She closed her journal around her finger to mark the page. She looked back at the dragon with the same straightforward attention she gave anything she was trying to understand. "Hello," Saren said. The dragon's nostrils flared once. She exhaled slowly, and the air that came with it was warm in a way that had nothing to do with fire, a dry, steady heat, like a hearthstone that had been warm for a long time. She stepped aside from the gate. Saren stood, picked up her basket and walked through. She did not hurry. She paid attention to the path, which was worn stone with moss growing at the edges, and to the garden walls rising on the left side, and to the inner courtyard opening ahead with its collapsed fountain and the east-facing wall she had described from memory, where the heart moss grew in long dark green ropes along the stone. She went to the wall. She found a healthy section. She cut carefully, exactly at the root bed, the way she had said she would. She gathered what she needed more than she needed for Tao, because she was a healer and heart moss kept well if dried correctly, and she might need it again, and she wrapped it in the cloth from her basket and placed it inside without rushing. The dragon watched from the courtyard center the whole time. Saren worked in silence for a few minutes. Then she said, "The record should be corrected. I can do that or help do it. The current Canton archivist is Audrin's wife's sister. She's careful. She cares about accuracy." Saren turned to look at the dragon directly. "You don't have to decide that now. I'm just saying it's possible." The dragon said nothing. She had not spoken at all, and Saren did not know yet if she would, or could, or chose to. That was all right. Saren had learned from Audrin that some patients communicated in other registers than words, and that pressing for speech before trust was established was usually counterproductive. She picked up her basket. She walked back toward the gate. At the threshold she stopped, turned around and looked at the east-facing wall, at the heart moss still growing there in long, healthy ropes, and then up at the dragon, still watching from the courtyard center with those precise amber eyes. "I'll come back," Saren said. "Not to take anything, just to sit, if that's all right." The dragon held her gaze for a long moment. Then she moved, not toward the gate, but toward the garden wall. She lowered herself to the courtyard floor in a slow, deliberate settling, the way something very old moves when it has decided to stop bracing itself against the world. Her tail curled around behind her, and her head came down onto her forelimbs, and she looked at Saren with those amber eyes still precise and still without warmth that was easily named, but different somehow from how they had looked 10 minutes ago. She did not close the gate. Saren walked out. She came back the next morning, and the morning after that, and the one after that. She brought her journal and her ordinary narrating voice, and sometimes a wrapped bundle of something useful, good cedarwood, a salve she made for dry skin that worked equally well on cracked scale edges, dried fruit that had no medical application, but that she had read ancient mountain range guardians sometimes took in winter when prey was scarce. She did not speak about the betrayal again. She had said it. It was said. There was nothing to gain from repeating it, and she had learned early that the difference between a truth that helps and a truth used as leverage was entirely a matter of how often you reached for it. On the 11th morning, the dragon spoke for the first time. Her voice was low and rough with disuse, like a door hinge slowly relearning its purpose. She said, "The records will not change what happened." "No," Saren agreed, without looking up from her journal. "But they'll change what people believe happened. That matters in its own way." The dragon was quiet for a while. A crow landed on the collapsed wall and regarded them both with the frank indifference of something that had witnessed 7 years of silence and was open to witnessing something else. "The moss grows back faster," the dragon said finally, "if you cut it at an angle." Saren looked up. She looked at the heart moss along the east wall. She looked back at the dragon. "Show me," she said. The dragon unfolded herself, slow, deliberate, immense, and walked toward the garden wall, and Saren followed, her journal open to a new page, pen already in hand. Outside the gate, the valley below Veth's crossing lay bright in the early light, and for the first time in 7 years, the black granite stood open,